Before the first rain revealed the issue, the cabin stood for 3 weeks. The roof was leaking water in 6 locations, seeping into the lower logs and collecting on the dirt floor. The constructor had completed the apparent task of covering poles with bark, covering it with dirt, and declaring it complete. By the second the ridgepole had begun to sag in the winter, the entire structure would have to be rebuilt by the 3rd year. The 1830s saw a recurrence of this image throughout the American frontier. Arriving settlers from England, Ireland, while the eastern states contributed zeal and resolve, however, they were missing one essential component. They would never used logs for construction before. Stone, brick, and timber frame were part of their tradition, and the distance between what they believed they were aware that the wilderness required them to destroy their cabins within 5 years. However, dispersed, another kind of structure was rising across the Pacific Northwest and the Rocky Mountains. Cabins that wouldn't seep, snow-shedding roofs that wouldn't collapse, buildings that would remain intact in the 1900s, enduring more than 150 years of mountain winters before the 2000s. Nothing was being done by the builders, enchanting. They were using methods developed in Scandinavian woodlands over thousands of years. Methods that realized a single basic fact. The enemy is water, and everything else is simply information. This is the tale of how that information proliferated throughout the frontier. The particular methods that distinguish success from failure, and the reasons why certain cabins decayed over certain seasons, whereas others endured for generations. Because it wasn't luck that made the difference in the end. It was accuracy and the readiness to do things correctly the first time, even if they appeared unreasonable. Bark was the first thing that caused the issue. Each and every novice constructor made the same error. Trees were chopped down, hauled to the construction site, and began piling. Because it took time to remove and didn't appear necessary, the bark remained in place. In the East, barns and bark on logs was frequently utilized for temporary buildings without causing any immediate issues. However, the East was not the frontier. Temperature fluctuations were severe at higher elevations in the Rockies. Summertime temperatures can rise to 90 degrees. Winter evenings became at least 10 degrees below zero. Bark retained moisture, and the cycle of freeze-thaw was unrelenting. Against the wood surface throughout each cycle, giving decay fungus the ideal growing medium. In 18 months, logs revealed soft places with the bark still in place. The sapwood behind the bark was too tempting for wood-boring insects to resist. Then came carpenter ants. The structural stability had been jeopardized by the 3rd year. On this point, historical documentation is clear. Bark removal was highlighted in all frontier construction guides. In a straightforward 1850s guidebook, it was advised to remove the bark since it contained dampness that attracted insects and decaying. Analysis of 18th and 19th century survivors. Century cottages attested to this. After 150 years, the buildings are still standing. There was a commonality among years. Sapwood and bark had all been cut away, leaving just heartwood that is thick. This was innate knowledge for the Swedish and Finnish trappers operating in the northern territories. For thousands of years, their forefathers had resided in timber. Scandinavian log structure dates back thousands of years, honed by innumerable generations of softwood forest experience. As soon as these builders got to, they transported that acquired knowledge to America beginning in 1638. Additionally, when the first step was usually the same when they built a cottage, total removal of the bark. It was a timing technique. Only in late spring and early summer, when sap flowed heavily, would the bark peel smoothly. The outer bark separated from the interior bast layer through a vertical cut between branches. Employees peeled the whole portions, revealing pristine wood beneath. They took their time, making sure there were no pockets left where moisture might build up. The structure's lifespan would increase by decades as a result of the additional days spent on this work. However, bark removal was merely the initial principle. Pitch or roof pitch came in second. Additionally, this is where the difference in expertise between seasoned and novice builders was most apparent. Eastern settlers. Back home, states constructed roofs similar to those they saw. 20 to 30 degrees shallow pitches that appeared sufficient and saved supplies. These individuals had constructed outbuildings, homes, and barns in Virginia and Pennsylvania, in Ohio. They thought they understood construction. What they failed to do, recognize how water behaves on various materials. Eastern buildings made use of clapboards or chopped shingles that, even on moderate pitches, shed water well. Cottages on the frontier, particularly in used whatever materials were readily available in the early years. Sod, bark, rough split shakes. The way these materials shed water was different. It was taken up by them, and on shallow pitches that water that had been absorbed remained and saturated the roof framework. This point is often emphasized in the historical record. Your roof will be drier and last longer if the gables are steeper because the water will swiftly drain from your thatched, beakhead, or shingled roof. Won't hold on to moisture, preventing it from collapsing. Skilled builders created steep pitch designs from the beginning, at least 45 to grind. Numerous cabins in the Pacific Northwest that deal with 140 to 170 of precipitation each year pushed in the direction of 60-degree, and this wasn't going overboard. It was a matter of survival, engineering. Steep surfaces don't pull water. Before it builds up to a harmful weight, snow falls off. And a high-pitch roof was rarely impacted by moisture that would destroy a shallow pitch roof in 5 years. The technique used to produce steep pitch used horizontal PLN roofing logs that were notched into gable wall logs that were gradually shortened. Every subsequent log, in order to create the triangle profile, the builder worked upward, cutting the gable end shorter. A flat roof could just 2 or 3 gable wall logs should be used. As many logs as possible were used in the steep roof, a full story height, producing pitches that are close to or higher than 45-degree. The weight made engineering important. The weight of a summer dry sod roof was around 250 kg square meter, or 51 lb square foot. The load of wooden shingles is already doubled. This is increased by winter snowpack and moisture saturation. Every square meter, 4,500 kilograms. That is more than 3 tons of cargo aboard a standard 12-4-foot cabin. Weight bearing down on the rafters and ridgepole. Support structures that were poorly constructed failed disastrously. Typically in the spring, when the sod was saturated to its full weight by melting snow. The numerous collapses are documented in historical records, with families narrowly escaping as roof structures collapsed. The shortcoming similar traits such as undersized ridge poles, inadequate pitch that permits snow accumulation, and rafts and inadequate foundation support caused walls to expand when they were loaded. From the start, successful builders made calculations for this weight. For ridge poles, they chose old growth logs, 8 to 10 inches in diameter, straight grain wood that is defect-free and knot-free. They put the support posts in the right places. They made sure the wall logs were big enough to support the weight without getting compressed. Additionally, they constructed a pitch that was steep enough to prevent snow from building up to dangerous levels in the first place. The resources they shared their own narrative. There were 4 main roofing systems that dominated the frontier, each tailored to the climate and resources of the area. Cedar split by hand. When resources and time allowed, shingles were the gold standard. The log selection was the first step in the procedure. Builders were looking for cedar with straight grains, timber that would break neatly, such as oak old growth or pine. They make bolts out of logs, 18 to 24 inches long, and then divided them into separate pieces using a froe and mallet. Shingles. The froe was an L-shaped instrument with a blade that was 8 to 12 inches long, wooden handle that is perpendicular. The method involved using a wooden mallet to drive the blade into the bolt end drain, then to spread the split, twist the handle. Twist again after pushing down 3 to 6 inches. Then the shingle came loose. Hundreds of rough shingles could be produced every day by a skilled splitter. Cedar gained widespread favor due to its inherent resistance to decay. The oils in the wood repelled moisture, rotting and insects. The Pacific Northwest's western red cedar proved especially remarkable trees that range in age from 350 to 750 years, have straight grain, and gigantic proportions. However, builders of the Rocky Mountains made use of whatever fir, pine, or cedar was on hand, realizing that any species heartwood much-lived its sapwood. The shingles were placed in particular configurations. In order to produce a fractured link, builders started at the eaves and worked their way up. Shingles that overlapped like fish scales in a pattern. The viewable area, or exposure, was between 1/3 and half of the shingle. Length. This produced 3 24-inch shakes with a 10-inch exposure. Layers that overlap everywhere. 3 layers of defense against water intrusion. The method of fastening based on the availability of nails. The cost of hand-wrought iron nails was high, frequently more expensive than the actual shingles. Builders utilized 2 nails per shingle, positioned 3 to 4 of the way down where available, about 1 inch from the edges, and placed so that they were covered by the course above. The wood was able to expand and contract as a result. without splitting when the moisture content varies. In areas with limited nail availability, traditional Scandinavian weight pole systems offered the substitute. At the top of the overlapping courses are heavy debarked logs, anchored along the gable edges with tree roots and held at appropriate intervals by notched cross-sections known as roof knees. Bindings. Everything was kept in place and allowed to breathe thanks to the weight. Shakes' lower edges could be pushed away in favorable conditions for air and light, a quality that trappers and seasonal camps value. Cedar shakes installed correctly, roofs needed to be replaced after 30 to 50 years. The living examples from the 1800s that are still in existence today made use of these methods, evidence of their efficacy. When time was of the essence, bark roofing provided quicker installation. Crucial. Before winter, late-season cabin construction frequently required speed, over time. In the north, birch bark was especially popular, bringing with it centuries of Scandinavian experience. The timing of harvest was critical. Peeled bark except in the summer when sap flowed heavily and neatly. Between branches, there was a single vertical cut that allowed the outer bark to split off from the inner bast layer, creating sheets that are the same length as the circumference of the tree. The crucial information: trees were able to endure and thrive by removing only the outer bark without affecting the bast layer. New bark had to be stored flat beneath large weights right away, otherwise it would curl into tightly packed rolls that were impossible to flatten. Multiple layers were used during installation, at least 2, usually 4 to 6, with extraordinary configurations with up to 16 layers. With the internal bast surface facing up, each layer descended. Rough-hewn roof planks that were secured in place without the need of nails by friction. Moving toward the ridge from the eaves, each course was overlapped by builders like shingles, with bark protruding about 3 inches at the lower edge, establishing a drip line. The roof ridge was straddled by extra-long sheets. The full of the system was held in place by hefty wooden poles that were bound with tree roots at the gables and interlocked at the top. Rocks frequently added to the weight poles for wind protection. Natural rot was produced by the bark of western red cedars in Oregon area. Reduced processing time and comparable resistivity to cedar shakes. Cottonwood bark saws are used along river bottoms in swampy places. The universal rule: several layers that overlap. Unavoidably, one layer leaked. There are 6 tiers. Made a membrane that is watertight. Conventional birch bark roofs needed to be replaced after about 30 years. Replacement: exceptional durability for a material that only needs to be flattened. The predominant roofing material was sod, treeless prairie where conventional techniques couldn't be used. The vast plains provided virtually nothing. Timber, with the exception of little cottonwood groves by streams. This changed complete construction. On broad prairie, what worked in wooded mountains didn't work, necessitating drastic adjustment. The method was inspired by the turf roof customs of Scandinavia and studies of the building of Native American earth lodges, but it required particular expertise on materials and engineering. Unbroken ground with clay soil and thick, fibrous root systems is where prairie sod originated. Buffalo grass, Indian grass, wiregrass, prairie cord grass, and small blue stems emerged. Strong enough to hold soil together under extreme weight, the root structures are significantly thicker than those of contemporary lawn grass. Following when the breaking plow was invented in the middle of the 1880s, settlers were able to chop sod into strips, 12 to 18 inches in width and 3 to 4 inches in thickness, then divide them into 2 to 3 foot sections, lengths known as prairie marble. In the past, people had to manually cut sod, brick by brick with spades. Although backbreaking, the work was essential. In the absence of wood for conventional roofing, sod was the only option. The structural specifications required strong engineering. That dry weight of 51 pounds per square foot rises to more than 100 pounds. Strong cedar ridge poles or sawed lumber were needed because of the winter's snow and wetness. Rafters with sheathing made of solid wood. Inadequate supports resulted in collapse. Though the conventional technique of installation involved first covering roof boards with 2 to 6 sheets of birch bark, overlapping from the eaves, vertically to form a membrane that is watertight. Blocks of sod were set up right away to keep the bark flat by covering it. 2 employees worked together in tight coordination. One placed sod and the other laid bark. Prior to the bark curling, as a drainage layer, the first layer of sod moved grass side down the wilted grass, defending the bark. The blocks were arranged in a brick pattern that was staggered. The second layer turned grass side up, which allowed the grass to grow farther and eventually seep into the lower layer, forming one sturdy, well-integrated structure. The overall thickness was 6 to 8 inches. The mass offered advantages.